The moment I knew my daughter was about to lose something far more important than a wedding venue, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking down at her folded linen napkin, while another woman quietly dismantled 25 years of my life. "We knew you were a single father," Patricia Whitmore said with a pleasant smile as she lifted her wine glass. "Now we understand why." The words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. The table fell into one of those strange silences where nobody breathes quite normally anymore. Even the waiter approaching with another basket of bread slowed his steps before turning away. I looked across the white tablecloth at my daughter. Emily folded the corner of her napkin once, then twice. Finally, she whispered without raising her eyes, "Please, Dad, don't make this awkward." Not "that's enough." Not "don't talk to my father like that." Just, "Please don't make this awkward." Funny how one sentence can weigh more than 25 years. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I glanced around the private dining room at Veritas, one of those upscale restaurants in downtown Columbus, where every plate looks like a piece of artwork and everyone speaks half a volume quieter than normal. Ryan Whitmore sat beside Emily in a navy suit that probably cost more than every suit I'd owned put together. He rested one arm casually across the back of her chair, wearing the confident smile of a man who had never worried about paying rent. Across from him sat his parents. Harold Whitmore held his wine glass by the stem and studied me the same way I'd inspected bridge supports during my engineering days looking for cracks. Patricia smiled with perfect posture and perfectly chosen words. Not insults, observations, the kind that leave no fingerprints. Dinner had started politely enough. They'd asked where I lived, how long I'd been retired, what kind of truck I drove. When I answered honestly, a 15-year-old F-150, Patricia had smiled. "Oh, oh," as though that single syllable explained everything she believed about me. Then Harold leaned forward. "So Daniel, engineering for the state, correct?" "That's right. Civil, mostly bridge rehabilitation, some historical preservation projects." He nodded politely. "And retirement has been comfortable." Emily answered before I could. "Dad never really cared about money." She meant it as a compliment. Patricia didn't hear it that way. "I'm sure that teaches valuable lessons," she said. "Ryan's family has always believed financial ambition is important." Ryan chuckled softly. "My mother likes measurable success." I smiled. I always figured raising my daughter was measurable enough. Emily gave me a quick smile, one that disappeared almost as quickly as it came. The conversation drifted toward wedding plans, flowers, guest lists, the historic estate they'd chosen outside Columbus, Oak Ridge Manor. Ryan described it proudly. It took months to secure. Patricia added, "Only certain families even know it's available." I nodded. "It's a beautiful property." She looked surprised. "You've been there?" "A few times." I didn't realize. There are a lot of old buildings in Franklin County. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. My briefcase rested beside my chair. Inside it sat the final approval packet for Oak Ridge Manor. One signature remained. Mine. Not because I owned the place. Because every major private event held there required final authorization from the Preservation Trust responsible for protecting the property. The board reviewed applications. The chairman signed the approval. For the past 6 years, I'd been that chairman. Volunteer work. No salary. No title on my business cards because I didn't have business cards anymore. Just something I believed mattered. Historic buildings disappear fast when nobody fights for them. Emily knew I volunteered. She never asked exactly what I did. I never thought it mattered. Patricia continued speaking. "I suppose Emily had to become independent very young?" I looked at her. "What makes you think that single-parent homes usually require children to mature faster?" Her smile never moved. "I've read quite a bit about it." Ryan took another sip of wine. "Dad says adversity builds character." Harold nodded once. "It often does." Patricia reached over and lightly touched Emily's hand. "We were worried at first." Emily looked confused. "Worried? About blending two very different families?" Then Patricia looked directly at me. "We knew you were a single father." She paused just long enough. "Now we understand why." Nobody moved. Ryan didn't object. Harold studied his wine. Emily stared at her lap. I waited. Not for Patricia. For Emily. All she had to say was one sentence. One. Instead, she whispered, "Please, Dad, don't make this awkward." I looked at her for several long seconds. In that moment, I wasn't seeing a 30-year-old woman wearing an engagement ring. I was seeing the little girl who used to run toward me after soccer practice with grass stains on both knees. The 6-year-old who insisted I braid her hair before school because I was finally getting better at it. The teenager who once hugged me so hard after Father's Day breakfast that she'd spilled orange juice all over my shirt. That little girl would never have stayed quiet. Somewhere along the way, life had taught her silence was easier. My knee reminded me it had been raining all afternoon. The old injury always complained before storms. I pushed my chair back carefully. The wood floor creaked beneath my weight. Emily looked up. "Dad," I picked up my jacket, then my worn leather briefcase. Ryan frowned. "We're still discussing the venue details." "I know." Patricia tilted her head. "Are you leaving?" "I think it's best." Emily stood halfway. "Dad, please." I smiled at her, a tired smile. "You enjoy your dinner." She looked relieved. That hurt more than Patricia's words. Harold finally spoke. "I'm sure we can all move forward like adults." "I hope so." Ryan gestured toward my briefcase. "The approval packet is in there, isn't it?" I met his eyes. "It is." "Then maybe we can finish everything Monday." "Maybe." Patricia laughed lightly. "I knew you'd be reasonable." I didn't answer. I simply walked toward the restaurant entrance. The hostess opened the front door. Cool Ohio evening air met my face. Behind me, I heard dishes clinking. Conversation slowly restarting. None of them knew that the papers inside my briefcase carried one signature line they had never bothered to read. And none of them realized they had just watched the man whose name was already printed there walk out before they ever saw it. I didn't sleep much that night. The house was quiet in the way only an old house can be. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped against the kitchen window. Every so often, the floorboards settled with a soft pop, almost like someone walking down the hallway. For years, those sounds had comforted me. That night, they only reminded me I was alone. I hung my suit jacket over the back of a chair and placed my leather briefcase on the kitchen table. It had been with me through bridge inspections, county meetings, retirement ceremonies, and more volunteer board meetings than I could count. I rested my hand on it for a moment but didn't open it. Instead, I reached into the medicine cabinet for my arthritis pills. My right knee had stiffened after climbing the restaurant steps. 62 isn't ancient, but the body has a way of keeping score. I swallowed the pills with a glass of water and stood quietly in the kitchen looking toward the family room. There on the fireplace mantel sat dozens of photographs. Emily at 6 missing her front teeth. Emily in a blue soccer uniform holding a muddy trophy almost bigger than she was. Emily at her high school graduation. Emily hugging me after Ohio State accepted her. There weren't many pictures of me. Single parents usually end up behind the camera. I picked up one frame. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her ponytail leaned sideways because I'd still been learning how to do her hair properly. The first few months after her mother left had been rough. Not because I didn't know how to cook or clean, because I had no idea how to be both parents at once. I learned, poorly at first. The first braid I attempted looked like a tangled extension cord. Emily laughed so hard she nearly fell off the bathroom stool. "It's okay, Daddy," she'd said between giggles. "We'll practice." So we practiced, every morning. Eventually the braids became straighter. The lunches became less embarrassing. The laundry stopped turning pink. Little victories. Nobody applauds those. But they matter. I smiled without realizing it. Then I remembered the restaurant. Emily lowering her eyes. "Please, Dad." The smile disappeared. The next morning arrived gray and damp. Saturday mornings had followed the same routine since retirement. Coffee. Local newspaper. A slow walk around the backyard to check the vegetable garden. This morning I barely tasted the coffee. At 9:30 my cell phone rang. The screen read, "Laura Jenkins, Oak Ridge Manor." I answered. "Morning, Laura." "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. We're putting together next month's board packet, and I wanted to check whether you've reviewed the Whitmore wedding approval." I looked toward the briefcase. "It's sitting in front of me." "We still need your signed approval packet before we can issue the final authorization." "I know." She hesitated. "Everything all right?" Laura had worked with the Preservation Trust almost 15 years. She knew my voice. She also knew I wasn't someone who delayed paperwork. "There were some unexpected developments." "I'm sorry to hear that." She paused again. "I should mention we've already completed structural review, insurance verification, fire occupancy, and vendor compliance. Everything looks fine except the final chairman approval. I'll review it carefully." As always, after we hung up, I finally unclasped the briefcase. Inside sat a thick folder. Across the front, Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust. Oak Ridge Manor. Private event authorization. Beneath it sat another folder containing inspection photographs from the manor. Sometimes people assumed Oak Ridge Manor belonged to a wealthy family. It hadn't for years. The estate had nearly been demolished after major structural damage decades earlier. Back then, I was still working for the state as a civil engineer. I was one of several engineers asked to inspect the foundation. The old limestone walls had shifted. Roof supports were failing. Most officials recommended demolition. A handful of us argued it could be saved. It took years. Fundraising, volunteer labor, grant applications, county hearings that stretched late into the night. When restoration finally finished, the estate became the responsibility of the Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust. Years later, after I retired, they asked if I'd join the board. Eventually, they asked me to chair it. Not because I was wealthy, because I'd spent 20 years making sure the building still existed. None of that had ever seemed important enough to tell Emily. When she'd asked how retirement was going, I'd usually answer, keeping busy. That was true, just incomplete. Around noon, another call came. This one from Emily. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A minute later, a text appeared. Dad, can we please talk? I didn't answer immediately. Before I could decide what to say, another message arrived. Ryan feels terrible about last night. I read it twice. Ryan felt terrible. He hadn't looked particularly uncomfortable while his mother insulted me. I slipped the phone into my pocket without replying. An hour later, it rang again. This time I answered. Emily sounded exhausted. Hi. Hi, sweetheart. Several seconds passed. I wish you hadn't left. I wish I'd had a reason to stay. She inhaled quietly. Patricia didn't mean... I stopped her gently. Don't explain someone else's words. I'm trying to keep everyone together. I know. Can you just sign the venue paperwork? There it was. Not, Dad, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry. Just, can you sign? I haven't finished reviewing it. It should only take a minute. It deserves longer than a minute. Her voice tightened. They've already booked vendors. I understand. I can't keep telling everyone we're waiting. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I know. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I'll call you later. Okay. She hung up first. I set the phone down and stared out the kitchen window. Rain had stopped. A pair of robins hopped across the wet grass. Life continued. Mine just felt strangely paused. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Not Emily. Ryan. The message contained only one sentence. Let's not make this personal. Just sign the papers. I read it once. Then again. Personal. I'd spent decades separating personal feelings from professional responsibility. Engineers don't get to ignore safety because someone seems nice. Trustees don't skip procedures because someone feels impatient. Oak Ridge Manor wasn't mine. It belonged to history. Every approval followed the same process. Every applicant signed the same commitments. Every event required the same review. That's exactly why people trusted us. Still, his words lingered. Just sign the papers. As though my only purpose now was making their lives easier. I closed the folder and slid it back into my briefcase. Outside, the clouds finally broke apart, and a thin strip of evening sunlight reached across my backyard. For a brief moment, everything looked peaceful. But inside that briefcase sat more than paperwork. It held the one decision everyone suddenly expected me to make. And for the first time since becoming chairman, I wasn't sure whether the hardest part would be protecting a historic building or protecting what little remained of my relationship with my daughter. Monday morning started the way most of my Mondays had since retirement. I unlocked the side entrance to the Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust office a little before 8. The building wasn't fancy, just an old brick courthouse annex that had been converted into offices years ago. The floors creaked. The coffee in the break room was never strong enough, and everyone knew everyone else's grandkids. That was one thing I loved about volunteering. Nobody cared what kind of car you drove. They cared whether you showed up. Morning, Mr. Brooks. Laura Jenkins looked up from her desk with her usual warm smile. Morning, Laura. She handed me a stack of folders. Board meeting starts in 45 minutes. I thanked her and walked into my office. Calling it an office sounded grander than it really was. It held a wooden desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf full of preservation manuals, and a framed photograph of Oak Ridge Manor after the restoration had been completed. I'd stood in that photograph with dozens of volunteers. Most of them had since retired. A few had already passed away. Every time I looked at that picture, I remembered how close we'd come to losing the place forever. I sat down and opened the Whitmore file again. Everything looked exactly as Laura had described. Insurance certificates, vendor contracts, fire occupancy approval, parking logistics, noise restrictions, historic preservation agreement. There was only one issue. The signed code of event conduct was missing. It wasn't optional. Every private event at Oak Ridge Manor required it. The policy had been adopted 4 years earlier after a wedding guest damaged a restored staircase while taking photographs. The agreement wasn't complicated. Treat staff respectfully. Protect the property. Follow preservation guidelines. Accept responsibility for any damage. Every couple signed it without exception. I set the folder aside just as the board meeting began. For nearly 2 hours, we discussed roof repairs on an 1890 church grant applications for a historic schoolhouse and a cracked foundation beneath an old train depot. Nobody mentioned Emily's wedding. Nobody knew she was my daughter. That had always been intentional. When volunteer work becomes personal, people start questioning every decision you make. I never wanted anyone wondering whether I received special treatment, or gave it. After lunch, Laura knocked softly on my office door. "You have a visitor." I looked up. "A lawyer." That surprised me. "Send him in." A man about Ryan's age walked inside carrying a leather portfolio. He smiled professionally. "Mr. Brooks." "Yes. My name is Kevin Ellis. I represent Mr. Ryan Whitmore." I motioned toward the chair. He remained standing. "This won't take long." I already knew I wasn't going to enjoy the conversation. He removed a document from his portfolio. "My client is concerned that personal disagreements may be delaying approval of his wedding application." I folded my hands calmly. "The application is still under review. My client believes all requirements have already been satisfied." "They have not." He frowned. "Our understanding is different." I reached into the folder beside me and slid one sheet across the desk. "The Code of Event Conduct hasn't been signed." He glanced down. "That's administrative. It's mandatory. I'm sure an exception could be made." "There are no exceptions." His smile faded slightly. "Mr. Whitmore believes withholding approval because of a private family disagreement could expose the trust to legal action." I looked directly at him. "Mr. Ellis?" "Yes. Do you know how many weddings I've approved in the last 6 years?" He hesitated. "No. Neither do I." He looked confused. I stopped counting. I gently tapped the folder. "I don't remember people's last names after they're married. I remember whether they respected the process." He didn't answer. "I'm treating your client exactly the same way I've treated everyone else." Another silence. Finally, he collected the unsigned document. "I'll advise my client." "I appreciate that." He left without another word. The office felt strangely quiet afterward. Not because I was worried about being sued. I wasn't. The trust had attorneys far better than anything Ryan's law firm could provide. What unsettled me was something else. Ryan actually believed I was abusing my position. He couldn't imagine that an ordinary-looking retired engineer might simply be doing his job. That evening, my phone rang again. Emily. This time I answered immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." She sounded exhausted. "Ryan told me a lawyer visited you." "He did." "Dad, why?" "He hired him." "You know what I mean." I leaned back in my chair. "The application isn't complete. It's one missing signature. It's an important one." She sighed heavily. "They think you're punishing us." "I'm following policy." "You could finish this today." "I could." "Then why won't you?" The question stayed in the air between us. Finally, I answered honestly. "Because once I stop applying the rules equally, they stop meaning anything." She was quiet. "I don't know how to fix this." "I know. I feel like everyone expects me to choose." "You shouldn't have to." "But I am." Her voice cracked. "Ryan says if we lose Oak Ridge Manor, his parents will never forgive me." I closed my eyes. "And what about me?" Silence. "Long enough to hurt." I don't know." Neither did I. After we hung up, I drove home through light evening traffic. Columbus looked beautiful after a summer rain. Children rode bicycles through quiet neighborhoods. People grilled hamburgers in backyards. Normal life. Mine no longer felt normal. Inside the house, I microwaved leftover chicken soup. Retirement had taught me one useful lesson. Good soup always tastes better the second day. I carried the bowl into the family room and noticed something sticking out from beneath an old photo album on the coffee table. A handmade Father's Day card. The corners were worn from being opened too many times. I smiled before I even unfolded it. Purple construction paper. Crooked glitter glue. A 6-year-old's handwriting. "I'll always choose you, Daddy." Below it, she'd drawn the two of us holding hands. Her stick figures had enormous smiles. I'd kept every Father's Day card she'd ever made. Birthdays came and went. Christmas decorations got packed away. Those cards stayed. I sat there for a long time. The soup grew cold beside me. I thought about the little girl who used to wait by the front window every evening, watching for my old truck to turn onto our street. She'd race outside before I even parked. Daddy's home. Back then, she never wondered whether I was important enough. She only cared that I came home. I reached for the approval packet lying on the coffee table. The unsigned page waited near the end. One signature. One stroke of a pen. Everything could become easier. Emily would stop crying. Ryan's family would stop calling. The wedding could move forward. I picked up my fountain pen, uncapped it, placed the tip above the signature line. Then my eyes drifted back to the Father's Day card. "I'll always choose you, Daddy." My hand stopped. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because Patricia had insulted me. Not even because Ryan had threatened legal action. I stopped because for the first time in my life, I realized I was about to ignore my own principles simply to keep people happy. The tears came quietly. I hadn't cried when my wife left. I hadn't cried when I retired. I hadn't cried at that restaurant. But sitting alone in my living room holding a pen over a document that represented everything I'd spent decades believing in, I finally did. Not because strangers had judged me. Because the little girl who once promised she'd always choose me had become a woman who didn't know if she still could. I wiped my eyes, closed the folder, and returned the pen to my pocket. The papers would remain unsigned, at least for now. By Sunday afternoon, my house smelled like chicken noodle soup and fresh bread. Cooking had always helped me think. Back when Emily was little, I'd make a pot of soup almost every Sunday. It was cheap, easy to reheat during the week, and somehow made the whole house feel warmer, even in the middle of an Ohio winter. Old habits stick around. I was slicing carrots when I heard tires crunch across the gravel driveway. A silver SUV pulled in. Emily climbed out before the engine had completely stopped. She looked exhausted. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and the dark circles beneath her eyes told me she'd been sleeping about as well as I had. I opened the front door before she reached it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around me, not tightly, more like someone afraid the other person might pull away. "I've missed you," she whispered. "I live 20 minutes away," I said gently. "I know." We stepped inside. She glanced around the house. Nothing had really changed. The same worn oak floors. The same blue curtains she'd picked out when she was 14. The same grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner. "You still haven't replaced that couch?" she said with a tired smile. "It still works." "You always say that, and I'm usually right." For the first time in days, she laughed. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then reality returned. "I don't want to fight anymore." "Neither do I." I ladled soup into 2 bowls and set them on the kitchen table. She stared down at the steam rising from the broth. "I haven't had your soup in years. You always liked extra crackers." She smiled faintly. "You remembered." "I remember a lot of things." We ate quietly for several minutes. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It reminded me of the evenings after her soccer practices when she'd be too tired to talk until she'd finished half her dinner. Finally, she set down her spoon. "Dad." "I'm asking one more time. I already knew what was coming. Please sign the approval." I folded my napkin carefully. "Emily, I know the paperwork isn't technically finished." "It isn't. I know they shouldn't have pushed you. They shouldn't have. But if you sign it, all of this goes away." I looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't defending Patricia anymore. She wasn't making excuses for Ryan. She just looked overwhelmed. Like someone standing in the middle of a tug of war, convinced that letting go of either rope would destroy everything. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. She blinked. "What?" "Not Ryan. Not Patricia. You. What do you want?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I want everyone to stop hating each other." I asked a different question. She looked down at her hands. "I don't know anymore." That answer hurt because I believed it. She truly didn't know. I stood and walked into the living room. My briefcase sat beside the recliner. I picked it up and carried it back to the kitchen. Emily watched without saying a word. I opened the clasps, removed the approval packet, then laid it gently on the table between us. Her shoulders relaxed. "I knew you'd understand." "I didn't say that." I flipped through the pages one by one. Insurance, vendor agreements, historical preservation requirements, the unsigned code of event conduct. Finally, the chairman's signature page. I reached into my shirt pocket and removed my fountain pen. Emily let out a slow breath. "Thank you." I uncapped the pen. My signature belonged just beneath the printed words. Daniel Brooks, Chairman, Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust. The room was completely still. Then Emily's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. "I should wash my hands first." She stood quickly. "I'll be right back." She carried her bowl toward the sink and disappeared down the hallway toward the bathroom. Her phone remained on the kitchen table. I never made a habit of reading other people's messages. Privacy mattered, especially between parents and adult children. I wasn't even looking at the screen. Then it lit up. The message preview appeared automatically, large enough that I couldn't help seeing it. "Patricia, once he signs, we won't have to deal with him after the wedding." I froze. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe there was context. Before I could even process the first message, another notification appeared. "Ryan, just keep him calm until we get the approval." The pen slipped from my fingers. It landed softly on the table. I stared at the glowing screen. Neither message mentioned me by name. They didn't need to. I was the only he, the only approval, the only obstacle. 1,000 little moments from the past week suddenly lined up like pieces of a puzzle. Ryan insisting I just sign. The lawyer. The pressure. Patricia pretending reconciliation mattered. It had never been about making peace. It had been about getting what they wanted first, then deciding later whether I still belonged. I slowly looked toward the hallway. I could hear the bathroom faucet running. Emily had no idea I'd seen the messages. Or did she? The thought crossed my mind for only a second before I pushed it away. No, if she had known, she wouldn't have left her phone behind. At least, I hoped she wouldn't. She returned carrying a towel. The moment she saw my expression, her smile disappeared. Dad, I gently turned the phone so she could see the screen. Her face drained of color. She didn't touch it. For several long seconds, she simply stared. Her voice barely existed. I didn't know she sent that. I believe you. She looked at me with tears already forming. I swear. I know. But Ryan, she grabbed the phone and opened the conversation. Her thumb scrolled upward rapidly. Her breathing became uneven. Oh my God. She wasn't acting. I knew my daughter well enough to tell the difference. The further she scrolled, the more devastated she looked. There are more, she whispered. I didn't ask to see them. I didn't need to. She lowered herself into the chair as though her legs had given out. They've been talking like this. She couldn't finish. I sat back down across from her. The approval packet still rested between us, untouched. I'm so sorry. I know. I didn't know. I know. She buried her face in her hands. They kept saying they were trying to fix things. I waited. They told me you were just being stubborn. I know. They said if I stayed calm, everything would work out. Tears slipped through her fingers. For the first time since that dinner, I wasn't looking at my little girl. I was looking at a woman discovering that the people she trusted had quietly been deciding the future of her family without ever telling her. After several minutes, she looked up. So, her voice trembled. Will you sign now? The question surprised me. Not because she asked, because part of her still hoped everything could somehow be saved. I closed the folder, carefully, quietly. I can't sign this today. She stared at me in disbelief. Dad, if I sign now, neither of us will know whether they're apologizing because they mean it. I rested my hand gently on the folder. Or because they need something. She stood so quickly her chair scraped across the floor. You think I'm just like them? No. Then why are you doing this? I'm trying to protect both of us. She shook her head, tears falling freely now. No. You've already made up your mind. I haven't. You have. She grabbed her purse. I came here because I thought you still believed in me. I do. Then prove it. I am. She looked at me for one long, heartbreaking moment. Then she whispered the words I'd remember for a very long time. Maybe they were right about you. The front door closed harder than she intended. Her SUV backed down the driveway. Then she was gone. I stood alone in the kitchen. The soup had gone cold. The approval packet remained unsigned. And for the first time, I realized the hardest part wasn't standing against Ryan's family. It was accepting that doing the right thing sometimes looks exactly like doing the cruel thing to the person you love most. The week that followed felt strangely quiet. Not because people had stopped talking. Because they'd stopped talking to me. Emily didn't call. Ryan didn't send another text. Even Patricia, who had seemed determined to insert herself into every conversation, disappeared. Life, however, kept moving. Tuesday morning, I attended a board meeting about repairing the slate roof on a 19th century church. Wednesday afternoon, I helped inspect water damage at an old schoolhouse outside Columbus. Thursday, I spent an hour in my backyard pulling weeds that would probably return before the weekend. Routine has a way of keeping grief from swallowing you whole. Then Friday morning, Laura knocked on my office door. You should probably see this. She handed me a printed email. The sender was Patricia Whitmore. Not to me. To Oak Ridge Manor's event coordinator. The subject line read, Cancellation confirmation. I frowned. I never approved a cancellation. Laura nodded. Neither did we. The email explained that the Whitmore family had decided to move the wedding to an exclusive country club outside Dublin because, in Patricia's words, the trust has become unnecessarily difficult to work with. I read the message twice. So they canceled it themselves. 3 days ago. And they never told us. Laura sighed. They've already requested part of their deposit back. I closed the email. They're entitled to whatever the contract allows. Laura studied me carefully. You doing okay? I smiled. I've been through worse than paperwork. She smiled back. I figured. Before leaving, she hesitated. Oh, one more thing. She handed me another envelope. The board wanted this added to the file. Inside was a formal letter prepared by the trust's legal counsel. It summarized the timeline: application received, technical reviews completed, missing code of event conduct, attorney's threat received, no final denial ever issued. Applicant voluntarily withdrew before the approval process concluded. Everything documented, everything factual, everything professional. I slipped the letter into the Whitmore file. Something told me it wasn't finished telling its story. Saturday evening arrived warm and clear. The rehearsal dinner was being held at the country club Patricia had chosen after canceling Oak Ridge Manor. I wasn't invited. That didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the phone call I received a little after 6. Mr. Brooks. It was Laura. I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday. What's wrong? There was a request from Miss Brooks this afternoon. My heart skipped. What kind of request? She asked for the complete approval file. I stood. Did you give it to her? Yes. It belongs to her now. Laura lowered her voice. I also included the legal timeline prepared yesterday. I closed my eyes. Thank you. I thought she deserved facts instead of rumors. So did I. We hung up. For the next hour, I paced through my living room. I tried reading. Couldn't focus. Turned on the television. Muted it after 5 minutes. Finally, I sat on my back porch watching lightning bugs drift over the lawn. Whatever happened tonight, I couldn't control it anymore. Emily later told me exactly what happened. She remembered every word. When she arrived at the country club, everyone acted as though nothing unusual had happened. Round tables, white roses, champagne glasses, soft piano music. Patricia greeted guests with effortless grace. There she is, Patricia smiled, our beautiful bride. Emily forced a smile. Inside her purse rested the file from the trust. She hadn't opened it yet. Dinner began. People laughed. Someone joked about honeymoon destinations. Ryan seemed unusually relaxed, almost relieved. Then he stood to give a toast. He tapped his glass. I just want to thank everyone who's supported us through a few unexpected complications. Several guests chuckled politely. He smiled toward Emily. Families aren't always easy. A few people nodded knowingly. But eventually, he continued, everyone has to decide whether they're building a future. His eyes briefly scanned the room. Or staying trapped in the past. Polite applause followed. Emily reached into her purse. She pulled out the envelope, quietly opened it. The first page was the official timeline. She read, application received, complete, pending final chairman approval, missing required conduct agreement, no denial issued. Second page, copy of Ryan's attorney's letter threatening legal action against the trust. Third page, Patricia's cancellation request, time-stamped, submitted 48 hours before any final decision existed. Fourth page, the chairman's signature page, blank, below it, Chairman Daniel Brooks. Emily stared at the name, then continued reading. The final page contained a letter from the trust's attorney. It stated clearly, the application remained under routine review until voluntarily withdrawn by the applicants. At no time did Chairman Daniel Brooks reject or delay approval outside established preservation policy. She looked up slowly. Ryan was sitting back down, still smiling. Patricia noticed the paperwork first. What are you reading, dear? Emily didn't answer. Instead, she placed the first page in front of Ryan. He frowned. What is this? The truth. His smile disappeared. Patricia leaned closer. Ryan flipped through the pages faster and faster. His face tightened. Where did you get these? From the trust. Harold quietly adjusted his glasses. Ryan looked toward his parents. They're twisting this. Emily spoke calmly. No. She turned another page toward Patricia. You canceled Oak Ridge Manor. Patricia blinked. Well, of course we had to. No. Emily shook her head. You canceled before Dad even finished the review. Nobody at the nearby tables was talking anymore. Ryan lowered his voice. This isn't the place. Emily ignored him. You told everyone my father refused to cooperate. Patricia attempted a gentle smile. Sweetheart, the important thing is moving forward. Emily slid the attorney's timeline across the table. No, the important thing is telling the truth. Harold picked up the document. He read silently. His expression changed. He looked at Ryan. You threatened the trust. Ryan exhaled sharply. It was negotiation. You sent a legal threat over routine paperwork. Ryan didn't answer. Emily reached the final page, the chairman's signature sheet. She laid it flat on the table where everyone could see. My father wasn't some clerk delaying our wedding. She looked directly at Ryan. He was the chairman responsible for protecting that property. The room had become completely silent. Ryan rubbed both hands across his face. Emily! No. He reached toward her. She pulled the papers away. I asked you over and over if my father had done something wrong. Ryan swallowed. I was trying to protect us. By lying, Patricia finally lost her composure. We were protecting our family's reputation. Emily stared at her. By destroying mine, nobody answered. Then Ryan said the one thing he should never have said. Without my family, he paused frustrated. You'd still be nobody. The sentence echoed across the room. Even the waiter standing near the doorway stopped moving. Emily looked at him quietly. Not angrily, sadly. She slipped her engagement ring off her finger. Ryan's eyes widened. Emily! She placed the ring gently beside his wine glass. I'd rather be nobody. Her voice stayed calm. With my father, no one spoke. Not Patricia. Not Harold. Not the guests who suddenly found their dinner plates fascinating. Emily picked up the envelope, walked out of the ballroom, and never looked back. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. I answered before the first ring finished. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, she whispered, Dad, I'm here. I chose too late. No, you chose now. She began crying. I'll come tomorrow. I'll be home. After we hung up, I remained on the back porch. The summer night was quiet. Crickets chirped somewhere beyond the fence. I wasn't happy. There was no victory in hearing your daughter's heartbreak. But for the first time since that dinner at Veritas, she had found her own voice. And she had used it to tell the truth. It rained the morning after the rehearsal dinner. Not a heavy summer storm. Just one of those steady Ohio rains that seemed to wash the noise out of the world. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when I noticed my old Ford F-150 through the front window. Raindrops slid down the windshield in crooked lines, and beyond it someone stood at the end of the driveway. Emily. She wasn't holding an umbrella. She simply stood there soaked to the shoulders, as if she wasn't sure she had earned the right to come any closer. I opened the front door before she could knock. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I smiled. Come in, honey. Her lips trembled. The soup's getting cold. That was all I said. Not I told you so. Not you should have listened. Just, come in. She stepped inside and quietly took off her wet shoes by the door, just like she'd done since elementary school. The house looked exactly as it always had. The same framed family photos. The same quilt folded over the couch. The same clock ticking steadily in the hallway. She looked around as if seeing everything for the first time. I almost forgot how this place smells. Chicken noodle soup and coffee. And cinnamon. I smiled. That's because I made toast. For the first time in days, a tiny smile crossed her face. It disappeared almost immediately. I ruined everything. I shook my head. No, I did. You trusted the wrong people. I trusted them instead of you. That was harder to answer. I motioned toward the kitchen table. Sit. She lowered herself into the same chair she'd occupied a week earlier. This time there were no approval packets between us. Only 2 bowls of soup. For several minutes we ate quietly. Finally she placed her spoon down. I ended it. I know. I left the ring there. I know. I don't even remember driving home. Her voice cracked. I kept hearing what he said. I waited. Without my family, you'd still be nobody. She stared into her bowl. And then I realized she wiped away a tear. The only person who never made me feel like nobody was sitting here. Neither of us spoke for a while. Sometimes silence says exactly what words cannot. She reached into her purse. I brought something. She placed a small brass key on the table. I recognized it instantly. When Emily turned 18 and left for college, I'd handed her that spare house key. You never have to ask permission to come home, I'd told her. She slid it toward me. I don't deserve this anymore. I looked at the key, then at her. I gently pushed it back across the table. She frowned. Dad, it was never the house I trusted you with. She looked up. It was my heart. The tears she'd been holding back finally came. She covered her face with both hands. I'm so sorry. I know you are. I should have stopped Patricia that first night. Yes, I should have stood up when she insulted you. Yes, I kept thinking if I stayed quiet, everyone would calm down. I nodded slowly. Silence feels safe in the moment. She looked at me. But later, it costs more than we expect. She cried for several more minutes. I simply sat there. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is stay long enough for the tears to finish. The weeks that followed were quieter. Ryan called several times. Emily never answered. Patricia mailed a letter asking for an opportunity to clear up misunderstandings. Emily didn't open it. She dropped it into the recycling bin. Life settled into something slower, healthier. On Thursday afternoons, Emily started stopping by after work. Sometimes she'd help me weed the garden. Sometimes we'd watch old baseball games. Sometimes we just sit on the back porch without saying much at all. Little by little, we stop talking about what happened. Not because we forgot, because we didn't need to relive it every visit. One afternoon, she asked something that caught me off guard. Dad, why didn't you tell me you were chairman? I smiled. Would it have changed anything? She thought about it. Maybe. Then I'm glad I didn't. She looked puzzled. I never wanted your respect to depend on a title. She reached across the porch and squeezed my hand. It doesn't anymore. A few months later, Laura invited me to Oak Ridge Manor for the dedication of a newly restored garden wall. After the ceremony, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the younger trustees. Thank you for reminding all of us that preserving history isn't only about old buildings. Sometimes it's about preserving integrity when it's inconvenient. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my wallet. It meant more than they probably realized. Nearly 2 years passed. Time didn't erase everything. It rarely does. But it softened the sharp edges. Emily eventually met someone new. His name was Michael. He taught high school history on the west side of Columbus. The first time he came over for dinner, he spent 20 minutes asking me about restoring old bridges because he genuinely wanted to learn. When he accidentally tracked mud onto my kitchen floor, he apologized 3 separate times and insisted on cleaning it himself. No performance, no superiority, just kindness. One evening he asked if we could talk privately. We sat on the back porch while Emily helped bring dessert outside. He looked nervous. I'd like to ask your permission to marry your daughter. I laughed softly. You don't need my permission. I know. He smiled. But I'd still like your blessing. That felt different. I gave it gladly. Their wedding took place in my backyard on a warm September evening. No country club, no crystal chandeliers, no carefully rehearsed speeches designed to impress strangers. Our neighbors brought folding chairs. Friends strung warm white lights between the maple trees. Someone played acoustic guitar while children chased each other across the lawn. I wore a new suit this time. It fit a little better than the old one. My knee still complained as we walked together across the grass. Emily slipped her arm through mine. You okay? I'll survive. She smiled. You've always done that. When we reached the front, she stopped me for just a second. I chose the right arm this time. I looked at her. She squeezed my hand. I'm walking in with the person who never stopped choosing me. I couldn't answer. My throat wouldn't let me. So I simply kissed her forehead and placed her hand into Michael's. That was enough. Looking back now, people sometimes ask whether I regret not signing those papers the day everyone wanted me to. I don't. Not because the wedding was canceled. Not because Ryan faced the consequences of his own choices. But because I finally understood something I'd spent years trying to teach my daughter without ever saying it out loud. Respect is rarely destroyed by one cruel sentence. More often, it's lost in the silence that follows it. If you've ever found yourself choosing between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, you're not alone. I appreciate you spending this time with me and listening to my story. Take good care of yourself and never underestimate the quiet strength of doing what's right.